How do you foster great sibling relationships? Or help kids develop a personal relationship with Jesus? Or navigate family devotions when your kids are spread out in age? If these are questions you've ever asked, you're going to love today's bonus episode of the GraceLaced podcast. In honor of Ruth's first children's book, Home is Right Where You Are, we're going to get a little peek into the Simon's home. Today, Ruth's answering some of the most frequently asked questions she gets when it comes to parenting. So grab a piece of paper, friends. You're going to want to take notes. Okay, so Home is Right Where You Are came out in mid-September. And as we discussed a little bit on the previous episode of the podcast, mid-September ended up being pretty intense for the Simons family. True or false, Ruth?
Man, I don't even know what happened for about 6 weeks of my life. But yes, that accident with man cub number 3 was absolutely a detour for our family and happened right before the book launched. And so thanks to you and launch team and all our friends here on the podcast, as well as on social media, that book got into so many people's hands, and I'm super grateful. But there were some conversations that I wanted to have around that book that we never got to have. So here we are.
Yeah, we had hopes for lots of things. We had really dreamed big, and then not all of those things even kind of fell into place like we had hoped they would. And looking back now, I'm so grateful that the Lord knew that you were going to need some extra time and space. But I'm excited that we get to come back and circle back to it today. We had a really wonderful launch team during the process of that book. And over the course of a few weeks, they got to ask you some of these parenting questions. And as you talked through them, it just felt like, oh man, we want to share this a little bit more widely. These are excellent questions, the types of questions you get all the time. I get them via email, social media. I see them pop up in comments to every post anytime you talk about kids or family. And so I'm excited for people to get to hear right from you a little behind the scenes about what it looks like to raise kids, whether you have 6 boys or not.
Yeah. And for anyone who may not know, I am a mama to 6 boys, and my oldest is now 22 and my youngest is 11. And we are currently in multiple seasons of parenting, but I
Yeah.
do feel like I'm just enough out of the little years that I have some perspective on that season of life too. And Eve, you're right smack dab in the middle of
Yeah.
elementary school years. And so you chime in today. I'm not the expert here, so for sure you chime in and we can have a conversation about all these
Yeah.
seasons of parenting.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a 6-year-old and then 4-year-old twins. So we're first grade and preschool on my end. And I am grateful that you are ahead of me and I can ask you questions. Okay, let's get to it. So I loved this question. The first question is, how did you and Troy develop confidence in parenting, especially in the early years? I think that is so hard to feel like, do I know what I'm doing? Is this the
Mhm.
right direction? How did you build that
Yeah.
confidence?
Well, first of all, we were not confident right off the bat. Like I remember
Okay, that's good to
thinking,
hear.
oh my goodness, how many books do I have to read before I feel like
Yeah.
I have the method down or I know what I'm supposed to do? And I remember thinking as a young mom that there was a magic book out there, that there was
Mm,
somehow the right formula, the right book, the right
yeah.
method to make sure that your kids turn out great. And Troy and I both come from lovely families, but both of us came from homes where our parents may or may not have actually led us in the very things that we felt like were really, really important in our home. Meaning,
Yeah.
my parents were not believers for quite some time in my early years. And
Yeah.
then Troy's parents grew up in a generation where a lot of discipleship happened at church
Hmm.
versus Troy and I really saying, hey, we really believe we're the primary influences that have to disciple from home. It doesn't mean that any other method is wrong or anything else
Right.
is not solid. It's that when we looked at our family, we said, okay, we've been given, one at a time, all these boys, but we really started realizing like we can't just expect them to know the Lord or grow themselves spiritually or have
Hmm.
develop a family culture just by taking them to a once a week group at
Yeah.
church or Sunday or hoping that they'll catch it even at a Christian school. And so
Right.
all those things were part of our lives at one time or another, but ultimately we developed our confidence by just saying, okay, let's start with some sense of what our goals are as a family. If you write that out as a true mission statement, awesome. If you are really just working that out, that's great too. But
Yeah.
if you know my story, by the time it was like 2019, I think, Troy and I wrote out the 12 foundations for our family. That's what became the Foundations Family
Yeah.
Devotion book, which also started off as 12, you know, truths that we really wanted to raise our family with that showed up as prints in GraceLaced shop first. And so you can still find that in the shop if that helps you. But my point in saying that is they were biblical truths, and we knew these are things that we really want to instill in our family. But the only way to actually know if this is possible is for us to like really grow and start doing that with one another first, even
Mm.
before those kids were grown. So meaning,
Yeah.
early on, it's Ruth and Troy and a 2-year-old. Well, is that 2-year-old adding significantly to the family culture? Maybe not, but Troy and I need to start developing and already building out what it looks like to kind of build on these family foundations and these
Yeah.
strong desires for what our family culture is about. Are we a family that's going to have our phones at the table? Are we a family that's going to prioritize a meal where we have conversations? Just because you have a baby or just because you have, a really young child doesn't mean you don't start putting that into practice. Do you care about
Yeah.
looking at the word together? Well, that won't start just because you suddenly have teenagers who can sit still. It starts when you say, hey, we're going to work this out even imperfectly in a way where we're modeling it for the kids. And so I'd say the word confidence didn't come into play for many, many years. But as we started seeing fruit, as we started seeing, oh, we don't have to be perfect. We just need to go first. We need to be the
Yeah.
ones to set the example, to kind of go first, to try it out, to even admit, hey, littles, I don't always want to read my Bible either, but I know that this is how I'm fed. This is where I meet with the Lord. I know the heart of God, and He's so worthy. So when you come downstairs, if you see us reading our Bibles, that's why we're doing it. And it's that continual like working out how to be the discipler that is being discipled in our
Yeah.
homes. That builds the confidence of knowing I don't need to be amazing at this. I just need to be the one with a little more experience than my children.
Yeah. And just with more intentionality, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
choosing this, I'm setting this out. I think it's so helpful to hear. I think it's easy for especially new moms to get into that cycle of what's the next book? How do I fix this
Hmm.
one particular issue? What can I Google to get the magic answer? And just being reminded, like, there's not a magic answer, but we are going
No.
to have to look to the Lord, like consistently, regularly. That's super helpful. Okay. This builds a little bit on that last question. When your kids were little, so let's say maybe like 11, like if Caleb was 11, so like you've got all the boys, right? At that point?
Yeah, they.
Yes, but you've got a lot of little people. What did your rhythms for discipleship look like? Did they all sit with folded hands at the
Oh
dinner
my
table
goodness.
and sing sweet songs? And how did it look like?
Right. So number 1 and number 6 are 11 years apart. So yes, it
Yeah.
was like chaos in our home. They were all about 2 years apart. It was
Mhm.
chaos because somebody was always crying, somebody was always fussing, somebody always had a snotty nose and we're like trying to, somebody's always sick, somebody's always needing
Spilling
something.
something.
And at 11, thankfully, Caleb was kind of mature beyond his years and definitely knew how to like fry an egg or fold his laundry. But, you don't have like a lot of kids who know how to do a lot of things yet. And so, if I hope that gives you a mental picture, whether you're a mom or not, of just the chaos in the home. And so,
Hmm.
I think a lot of times as mamas, we imagine discipleship as being something, and we imagine our own like discipleship. We imagine our quiet times or our time with the Lord as being like sitting on a beautiful porch overlooking a lake with the birds chirping and the
If only.
candle, just our favorite anthro candle, just burning
The best
evenly.
coffee. Yeah.
Did you hear that? Burning
Yeah.
evenly. Is that sorry? I just
Instead of
derailed
a
this
big hole in the
conversation.
middle. Yeah.
I just totally derailed this conversation, but I'm like, okay, there's no perfect quiet time if my dumb candle is burning unevenly. Okay, back on track. But anyway, we just have this idea of it being so perfect. And we
Yeah.
imagine that our favorite Bible teacher is over there just having her best life with the
Mm.
best coffee and the right music playing and her Greek, concordance out, and everything is just like aligned and she is soaking up the word. And that's just not how it always is. Maybe there are seasons where
Yeah.
that rich study happens, but I think I learned early on that if I didn't let discipleship fit into the little margins and the crevices of
Mm.
my life, I wouldn't ever have time for it. And so in the same
Yeah.
way that you sometimes need to get in the car and listen to your Bible in audio form. A lot of times with discipleship, it was around the dinner table. We would sit, and
Yeah.
I still remember we literally were like, "What will keep our kids at the dining table?" Because the little one wants to like roll around on the ground. The other
A
one
hundred percent.
is like ripping the napkin, the paper napkin into little bits and then throwing it. And then somebody's like running his fingers around the sauce on the dinner plate. Like there's all these things that could keep it chaotic. And so we thought, okay, what if we, rather than move over to the living room, pass out hymnals and try to like have this really beautiful, quiet moment together, what if Troy or I just pull out our Bibles and just share a little bit of what we learned today and ask some questions?
Mm.
And hilariously, early on, we legitimately said, okay, the only way to kind of keep them at the table is to have something to munch on for
Mhm.
longer. So, like, whether it's like, how in the fall, sometimes you do like graham crackers dipped in like that pumpkin fluff or whatever, like it's just some
Yeah.
kind of easy dessert, but it's like very
Uh-huh.
interactive. You have to like dip it or you
Do
have to
something
whatever,
with it. Yeah.
do something with it. Or I remember famously sharing an artichoke, um, steamed artichoke and dip recipe. I think this was early on the blog or
Yeah, I
in
think it
social
is.
media. And I literally was just like, I don't know, but this is like part of our discipleship method. We steam an artichoke, and for whatever reason, our weird kids really love it. And so they peel these little, artichoke leaves off, dip it, and it takes forever, right? They're like
Uh-huh.
scraping it off, they're eating the sauce. And before you know it, they've been sitting there for a good 20 minutes while we share. And so
Yeah.
now everybody can sit there quietly and participate. But for many years, it was just finding teachable moments, not trying to be like, this is the prescribed time where everybody will have a good attitude, but rather go, hey, give me 5 minutes. Mama wants to share something that I learned today. Or
Yeah.
Troy will be like, I'm going to read out of the Psalms and listen
Mhm.
up. You guys can keep on eating, but no touching each other, just listen. And, and that's was when they were really little. But now we ask for more feedback. Now we'll say, okay, listen, and let's talk about this. And so I
Yeah.
think it builds and develops little by little, but I am not above bribing with some kind of fun little dessert to keep them at the table.
Yeah. I feel like I would like to be part of that too. If I pick a dessert that I love, it makes me want to sit around and chat for longer too.
I know.
Okay, so that's a really helpful tip and thought for a good rhythm. Are there any routines or rhythms that you wished you would have started earlier with your family that you eventually developed and you're like, oh, if only we had started this sooner, or we could have done it this way when we were younger, or anything that comes to mind for you?
You know, I think I well, I don't know that I have like any regrets about it, but I think we started the first two with some audio Bible through Hosanna Faith Comes by Hearing. They had these little
Hmm.
like MP3 players, and I think I used to post about that. And I slightly regret not carrying that on with them because
Mm,
audio really makes such a big difference.
yeah.
With our younger ones, I think we fell off that audio side of things, and
Hmm.
they would read or they would kind of have a little time where they kind of shared and talked about it with Troy and stuff. But I think it's hard when you're little to know what you're reading, to actually think about it. And so
Yeah.
I think audio is really helpful. I also think a rhythm that is helpful, it might even be to like have a partner so that you're not
Mm,
as really little ones, when you're like in elementary school, to even have an opportunity to say, hey, the next 20 minutes, we're going to make hot chocolate or we're going to make hot tea. We're going to both read and then we're going to both journal something. And
mm,
your child can always find a partner to kind of do that with so that
yeah.
in time it becomes a personal practice, but also it feels like something that they feel energized to like meet their
Yeah.
sibling or meet with
It's like
the
fun
parent.
and
And
special. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, the audio piece is something that I feel like we've just kind of discovered, and
Hmm.
not even just the Bible. We've really, I'm late to the game, I know, but Slugs and Bugs has been such a winner for us. Do you know about Slugs and Bugs?
I
It might have been
don't.
after your kids were little. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's this guy who puts scripture to song. And so every
Oh, I love
song
that.
is
Yeah.
just like scripture, but they're super fun. I don't mind listening to them myself, and I'll find myself like they get stuck in your head. And it's great because you're just rehearsing scripture in your head. And my kids love them. So we've been listening to them while we drive back and forth to school, which is about a 25-minute drive for us. And they just can't get enough of it. And then they'll hear one and be like, oh, I love this one. And so it's fun because it gets in their brain. And then later on, my favorite one recently, there's one about not grumbling or complaining. And
Uh-huh.
so
Yep.
later on, when grumbling and complaining comes up, I'm like, hey, remember that song that you love? What does it talk about again? And
Yep.
so sometimes I'll pull it up on my phone and we just go through it again. And so those like short snippets of audio, I think have been super helpful for them and
Our
fun.
version was before Slugs and Bugs. We had Seeds Family Worship. I'm sure they're
Yeah.
still around.
Yeah.
And so
That
we
comes around
we
too.
did a lot of Seeds Family Worship. And then even
Yeah.
before that time, old school, Steve Green used to put
Yeah.
scripture to
Uh
music.
huh.
Do you even
Yes,
know who
I
Steve
do.
Green is?
I do.
Steve.
Yes.
Okay,
That's my
okay.
childhood.
Our
Yes.
listeners are probably like literally, I don't know what you're talking about. But so back in the day, we memorized a lot of scripture to music. So I guess I would say that is a rhythm that I think really is helpful. I
Mm,
think we had such a big family that by the
yeah.
time it was number 3, 4, well, no, 4, 5, and
4,
6,
5, and
I
6.
felt like the olders had a lot more part in leading them. So
Yeah.
we had less time with
Yeah.
audio like that. But I do kind of regret it because I do think that our little ones, they're not little anymore. 11 and 13 is our number 6 and number 5. I don't think they have as much scripture memorized as the older ones because of that. I think they just had
Yeah.
less scripture to music
Input
playing.
over time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So interesting. It's been fun for us to, I literally, in just the past month, probably, we've really locked into Slugs and
I love
Bugs.
it.
So,
Well, you'll have to put the link for all
yeah,
that in the show notes, right? Yeah.
I will. I'll make sure they're there. Okay. What about, let's see, where do I want to go next? I have a couple of really great questions left. What do you think? I know you get this question a lot. What's the best way to help develop relationships and good friendship between siblings?
Yeah, I
Because your
do get
boys
this
do have,
question a lot.
because they have
Yeah,
incredible relationships.
they really do. And I think sometimes people imagine that there's just no way that kids could not fight and hit each other and be upset all the time. And I wouldn't say that our boys have never struggled or for sure there have been arguments. For sure there are times when one person got on the other person's nerves. But I would just say I think from the start we built into family vocabulary and culture that this family, no matter what friendships you cultivate outside the home, you'll never lose the centrality and the
Yeah.
awesomeness of having best friends at home. That's not to say your only friends are at home, but that
Right.
that will follow you through your whole life. I think when you start that kind of you start that narrative and it's a non-negotiable when that is like kind of locked into your family culture, then no matter what's going on or what season or if um, one of our boys one time said, hey, I'm sorry about last year, I feel like I was really emo last year. I just died laughing. I was like, wow, you're apologizing for all of last year, huh?
A whole
Because you were
year.
a little emo. And it was just funny that he said it that way, but no matter what's going on, I think there's just like a steadfastness to the family unit. There's
Yeah.
a reliability of the friendships, and it's worth fighting for because even
Yeah.
if you're really annoyed with somebody or you're like, I don't see eye to eye with that brother or that sibling, you are so reminded and you're told every single day of your life that these are your best friends that you kind of go, okay, well, I'm not gonna like you know lose them. So I'm gonna need to
Right.
invest in this. And what I was about to say, and I think the pause in my voice here was that I wanted to kind of like take it to the next level and say, and therefore we did not encourage our boys spending more time away outside the
Mm,
home than in the home. Doesn't mean
yeah.
that they didn't, go have fun or go to people's houses for play dates. I think we
Right.
actually didn't do sleepovers for a very, very long time. We're pretty much not the sleepover family. So we didn't do that with
Yeah.
friends and non-family members. Um, so they just didn't have extended time away from us. It might sound a little protective, but I think it was also just us saying, you know what? We have a short period of time where we get to cultivate family culture. And
Yeah.
two choices that we made that I think help foster sibling relationships. One was that they weren't encouraged to go spend more time outside the home than inside the home. We didn't deal with conflict between them by saying separate further. So if they had a
Mm,
conflict, we wouldn't say, oh, you just go have fun with your friends, leave them alone. You go do something else or go find two corners of the house and
yeah.
get as far away from each other. Now, there are times when we say that, but we say, come back in 10 minutes, go cool
Yeah.
off, or go pray about this. Like, holy moly, somebody's not dealing well with it today. And then we come back. But the idea being, we don't just say, let it blow over. And
Mm,
hopefully we'll come back with a tender heart, because you
yeah.
and I know that never happens. Like
Right.
we all like that method of being like, I'm just going to storm out of the room and be
Yeah.
upset. And then later on, I'm just going to pretend nothing happened.
Hmm.
But whether it's with your spouse or with a roommate or with a best friend or with your, parent or whoever it is, I have never known that to cultivate a greater tenderness or more
Yeah.
authenticity in the relationship. You actually come back and learn to be passive aggressive, and you learn to hide, and you learn to kind
Yeah.
of like sugarcoat things and be like, and train each other to not take each other's hurts seriously. So
Yeah.
instead, we say, like, hey, you're going to deal with this and you're going to talk it out and you're going to work through it. So even if you need to take a 10-minute break, you're going to come back and you're going to sit at the table and really work things through. Or when they're little, you're not just going to get a dump truck each so that you don't have to fight over it.
Yeah.
You're going to figure it out.
Figure it
So
out.
yeah, we did not buy 6 versions of something so that nobody would fight over toys.
Right.
We made sure that they actually came closer together, rather than spend time apart. And along that track, that's also why we never had the boys, we really never made it a goal for them to have their own bedrooms.
Mm,
So sometimes the oldest, whoever's oldest in the home, by the time they're in high school, their junior or senior year, they're kind of on a different schedule and they end up having their own
yeah.
bedroom, and it works because they're up late doing homework or
Yeah.
they're, whatever, they're getting up early. But even when we had the space, we actually put at least 2 in a room so that they would learn to like bond and cultivate relationship and not just hide
Yeah.
from one another. So we're not nobody. I mean, yeah, sometimes people wear headphones in the home, but not frequently, and certainly not when other people are around. So I think those are just like real practical little things that can help cultivate a sense of you're not in your own little world. You're part of this family.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. As you talked about that kind of prioritizing time at home versus like more than time away from home, how did you balance and how do you balance the like ministry life and family life? I think there's probably a lot of
Yeah.
people who feel that tension like, oh, there's all these things to do, but
Yep.
also my family. And so you guys have had that in a couple
Yep.
of different cycles in your past. So what does that look like?
Yeah. So in different seasons of our 26 years of marriage, we've been in full-time ministry. And
Yeah.
so there are people coming over for dinner. They're setting up chairs early for church. There is taking time out to serve and clean and volunteer, all that stuff. I would say, for one thing, every ministry we do, in the local church, or even the work that I do online, through my books or through GraceLaced, even even though that's not the local church, we see that as ministry work that the whole family
Yeah.
gets involved in. So
Yeah.
no, not all the Simon's boys help edit my books, and they're not all packaging every package, but they're all very aware and very part of it. So like, for example,
Yeah.
this morning I got up real early because I'm on a deadline for a project and I was working really hard on this project, and the 2 youngers came down and said, "Hey, we want to help you really." I mean, I'm putting words in their mouth. They said this, but they didn't say it so eloquently. But they basically were like, okay, we know that you've got a lot going on and we want to help you succeed at this. And we're so grateful you get to do this. Um, one of them said, I'll make you coffee. The other said, I'll make you eggs while I'm making breakfast. And
Aw.
so they literally brought me breakfast and coffee and took care of the dishes. And that to me is part of them saying,
Yeah.
Mama's not going off and doing her ministry work. We're part of her ministry work together as a family.
Yeah.
We also are very involved in our local church that we are part of founding and planting. And that means that we give a lot of time as a family to do that. But when we do it, we make sure that that's not just about the action and getting it done. We talk about what we're doing. We share stories about how we're being formed by
Mm.
volunteering, formed by serving, formed by sacrificing part of our
Yeah.
weekend to serve. So then it becomes formational and not just
Mm.
something we're checking off the list. I think that's the
Yeah.
big thing. Like whether you're like going to Awanas on a Wednesday night or you're part of serving in the church or you have a youth group or whatever it is that you're doing, make that part of a formational conversation that the whole family is talking about. Okay, so
Yeah.
you're going to youth group. Let's talk about what you learned at youth group and let's all dissect whether that was formational in your life and how we can all apply that. Or if there's
Yeah.
something that you didn't like about youth group, let's talk about what that was about too, rather than that's something you went to and now you're away from home and you come home and it has nothing to do with anything else.
It just
So we make
happened. Yeah.
so we make everything a part of the formational conversation. And then the second thing I would just say is we say no a lot. So I know this is the opposite of what I said in terms of how often we are serving or
Yeah.
whatever, but people are shocked at how many things we've said no to. We've said no to a lot of extracurricular things. The boys
Yeah.
have made choices to not do certain sports because of how much the travel takes them away
Yeah.
from home. And sometimes there have been seasons we all said, yes, let's do that. And we're at every track meet. But there are times when we've said, you know what, we're going to choose an activity that multiple people can go to at once so that we're not running six boys in all different directions
Yeah.
and we don't give up every single night of dinner together. So we've
Yeah.
prioritized some of that. And so you'd be shocked at how many nights we have at home because that's a priority for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned there you kind of ventured into the teen years with youth group. So we've spent a little bit of time
Yeah.
on littles, but you get a lot of questions, I think, now too about what does it look like to help guide a teenager in their own
Mhm.
personal walk with the Lord? You've talked about this before about people talk about teenage years being kind of scary, but you found it to be really sweet. And so talk about that.
Yeah. Well, um, I have loved the teen years. I mean, I am a big, big fan. I think we should be telling more stories of how teen years can be amazing and
Yeah.
teen years can be triumphant and
Mm,
exciting and some of the best years of parenting. Now, with that said, I would say with every single one of my young adult children, the three oldest, there was a moment in each one of their teen journeys where it got real heated and there was a
yeah.
really intense argument or multiple really intense arguments or a real moment where we butted heads and it wasn't okay and there were
Yeah.
things that were hurtful. And so I'm not saying that because it was wonderful that
It was
nothing was
easy.
ever hard.
Yeah.
Hard can still be wonderful. And so
Yeah.
but I would say in part I do think that teen years don't just automatically become wonderful just because they became a certain age. I think teen years are, I mean, I'm just going back to what I said in Now and Not Yet quite a bit, but your someday is made up of thousands of right nows, is what I said in that
Yeah.
book. And I would say teen years are a testimony to that, that the
Mm,
teen years are built from lots and lots of little, what seem like insignificant decisions and insignificant conversations. That conversation you had while you were washing dishes about telling your child about how you wish you had done something differently, or sharing a struggle with being in the word, or crying and saying it really hurt
yeah.
when this season of ministry went this one direction. Those slight, small little conversations that you don't even realize are making a difference actually ended up building out a relationship in the teen years that invited vulnerability,
Hmm.
transparency, and kind of built this family culture that there's respect in this conversation and it's not all about
Yeah.
rules. Because when you start talking about the grace of God in the early years, and as soon as they truly can understand why God's grace is better than religion and better than rules and
Yeah.
just doing things to earn his favor, when you can start having that conversation early, then you get into the teen years and there's a framework for saying,
Yeah.
I have some general rules, but the point is not rules. The point is trust. The point is relationship here. And that actually does develop into some of the um, best aspects of having young adult children. And
Yeah.
I have loved it so much that Eve, you know this, but I'm kind of whiny and grumpy right now that I raised
I
amazing young
know.
adults that I think are some of the best people and some of my best friends. And then they moved, like they left.
How dare
And
they?
I go, how is it that you like literally became one of my favorite people on earth? And now I don't get to talk to you all the time. Um, but I have to tell
I
you
know.
a sweet thing to just share is that all three of those olders this particular week, I've been painting a lot. And so it's like sitting there with my hand, holding a brush for hours and hours and hours. And all three of them have called me at different times. And we've been on the phone for like an
Oh,
hour or two, just catching up and talking. And so it
that's fun.
changes, but
Yeah.
the amazing things that you build can keep on building as they become adults.
Yeah. What about any specific encouragement, maybe for a mama who's like, that sounds wonderful to start young, but maybe they're new in their faith, they're hitting teenage
Yeah.
years, like new themselves. Like, where could they start, or what's the
Yep.
beginning point?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really valid question. I think that's most everyone is like, "Oh,
Mm.
wait, that would have
Wait,
been
we're
lovely had
teenagers.
I."
What's
Yeah,
happening?
whatever it is, right? I have a really
Yeah.
long list of things that I wish I had started 5 years ago. A very
Yeah.
long list. And so for all of us, there are things when we're like, "Well, how do I start today then?" Because
Yeah.
the ideal never happened. The
Right.
should have, could have never happened.
Yeah.
So first of all, I would just say this. Your your relationship with your young adult child, your spiritual impact and your discipleship of that child will follow the trajectory of your personal growth as well. So,
Yeah.
the number one thing I would say is, where are you at with the Lord, mom or
Hmm.
dad? And be transparent and honest about that. If you're a new believer and you're struggling and you're kind of like, I've got a lot of growing to do, be honest and say to that child, listen, I want to be one step ahead of you, but I am walking with the Lord. I am seeking to obey
Yeah.
him. I'm going to tell you where I screw up and I'm going to seek your forgiveness. But
Yeah.
as I attempt to lead and try to lead, I want you to remember that God has us right here, right now for a purpose. And even though mama is not some brilliant theologian, and even though I can't explain everything to you, I do love the Lord and I'm going to help point you to him day by day.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I'm going to do it perfectly. When you say that out loud and it's like a
Yeah.
reset. It
Yeah.
doesn't, there's no facades. You're not trying to pretend that anybody's got it all together. So, one, I think it starts with a really honest conversation, maybe one that even goes something like, you know what? If I could do it all over again, I wouldn't have given you a phone that young. And so
Yeah.
let's start talking about how I really want your heart to have lots and lots of things that fill it up that isn't just about being online. So,
Yeah.
let's let's talk about new ways and let's shift. But that conversation, see how it's not, hey, I listened to a podcast and I'd like to make some new rules in our
I'd
home.
like to take away your phone.
Right? It's about a conversation of
Yeah.
saying, hey, in humility, I can
Yeah.
see what's good for me. I can see how the Lord is leading us. Let's have a conversation about this because I love you and I care for you
Yeah.
and I deeply want to grow with you. So
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
think
think
that's
I
so
can start
helpful.
today.
Yeah. To just say, hey, I'm changing and growing, and our family will change and grow as a result.
Mhm.
And we're all learning together. I think that sets a really great tone for conversation.
And when any change that you make, you're part of it too. As in,
Yeah.
it never works to be like, hey, teenager, you need to scroll less. No, mama, you need to
Well,
scroll
while I
less.
keep going. Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
I think it's don't take your phone to bed. Like, keep it down here. You guys shouldn't be on your phone at 10 p.m. at night. Yeah, that's a great thing to say that our whole family is going to participate in.
Yeah.
Or, hey, don't raise your voice and be so rude when somebody is asking you to do something. Well, check your tone, mom, when you're talking to dad.
Yeah.
Like I think all those things could be a,
They
hey, it's
matter.
going to start with me and I'd like
Yeah.
us to work on this together.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think another question that comes up often when people hear that you have 6 boys is how do you intentionally encourage relationships? Either with you with the boys being an opposite gender parent, but also how do you encourage dad and boy relationships, especially if maybe their relationships are harder? Like sometimes
Yeah.
those guy relationships tend to butt heads if they're really similar, that sort of thing. Any tips or thoughts you have about those relationships?
Well, for both Troy and me, Troy and I have really specific interests. Like I have a specific area of work that I do. Like I'm really artistic. Not all my boys are artistic. A few of them are painters and artists. And so of course
Yeah.
there's a natural connection in our like love for art and creativity.
Yeah.
Troy is an avid outdoorsman.
Right.
He loves lots of things that involve, being deep in the woods, and he loves motorcycles, he loves mountain bikes, he loves all sorts of things like that. And what if we have a child who really loves racquetball and isn't as much into,
Yeah.
riding a mountain bike? And so what we've learned through the years is that our kids are not accessories for us to enjoy our
Mm.
lives better. So the
Oh,
goal
hold
is
on. Wait,
not,
wait, wait. You need to say that again. That's a really good word for all parents in any stage.
yeah, that our kids aren't accessories for us, and they're not there
Yeah.
primarily to just make us enjoy our lives more or to validate our lives as parents.
Yeah.
And I think when we kind of establish that, we realize um, God purposely put us in their lives as parents and them in our lives for our sanctification, for our mutual sanctifications. That
Yeah.
as a mom, I'm being sanctified, being made more like Christ, and they're ultimately understanding more about Jesus and becoming more like Christ because of us. And so when you start thinking about it less like, my child proves that I'm a good parent, or that
Mm.
I know how to do this, or that
Yeah.
they chose the right activities, went to the right school, have the right attitude, whatever it is, like when you stop thinking about that way, then you kind of start seeing them as people to get to know.
Yeah.
So that one kid who loves racquetball and doesn't like what his parent likes, well, you go and enjoy what he likes, and you go find out what he wants to do, and you
Yeah.
make room for conversations that we often say in this house. We say things like, hey, not every single person sees it this way. So let's also make sure that this weekend is a blessing to so and so, because
Yeah.
he may not like everything that we've already got planned. Let's also think about other ways. But we think about everything as, let's love the family. So if one child is not super into hiking, well, he goes on the hike anyway because he loves his family. But then we
Yeah.
also, in return, say, we're going to also nurture what you love too. Maybe that
Hmm.
child is like, I would love for nothing else than to craft something this afternoon. Well, be generous and craft with them too, or something like that.
Yeah.
But back to your original question, I would say, even in a big family like ours, we really prioritize trying to find time for one-on-one time, because
Mm.
there's a lot of group
Yeah.
time and group dynamics, but one-on-one time doesn't have to be an expensive date night out. It could be running to
Yeah.
the grocery store. It could mean like, hey, I'm going to go and like um, work on the property and kind of
Hmm.
go check on some things. Do you want to go with me and take a ride with me? It might mean, like I did a couple weeks ago, inviting one of my older kids to go and work an event with me, even though I probably have employees who could do it, but I invited him because it's an opportunity for me to have a getaway with him. And so
Yeah.
I think we just find different ways. If your kids are little, that might mean running to the grocery store and getting a treat, a cookie at the bakery, so that you just
Yeah.
have that time together. But the point is, you're not multitasking. You're not trying to answer all your text messages. You're not trying to listen to a podcast. You're spending time
Yeah.
with that child.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so helpful. I know my kids, we've attempted to do some of that, even as they're littles. And sometimes it really is as easy as saying, "Hey, I'm going to run to Target. Leah, do you want to come with me?" And she's
Yeah.
like,
Oh,
"Yes,
it's
I
so
do." And,
special.
and
Yep.
she's like, "Is it girl time?" Like, yes, that's what we're going to call it.
Oh my goodness. Tell
Target.
Leah
So,
that Auntie Ruth is dying to have a girl trip because
yes.
it's never girl time at my house.
Hi,
We,
that's true.
there's
Well,
never
you're
a
always
Target.
invited.
This basically every time there's a need to go to Target or Anthropologie or Pottery Barn or one of the quote girl stores, um,
Uh-huh.
they I don't know if I've told you this before, but the boys have a phrase. They say, assume snake protocol. This is what they call it because they line up and they
What does
follow
that
me
mean?
around. It means they look like a snake because there's six of
Hilarious.
them wind through the store with me. They don't care. They're not looking at anything. They're
Right.
there
They're
for
just
me.
following.
So a
I love
classic,
it.
like literally you'll see Ruth Simons going through Anthropology, touching everything because I have a tendency to like smell and touch things. And I'm
With six
touching
boys
everything
trailing
and they
behind her.
literally trail behind me like a tail and they're just following me around as I weave through the racks. And if I stop and like, ooh, mohair, and I'm like touching the soft sweater, they'll be like,
Mm.
soft. And then they'll move on to the next thing.
I love
Kid you
it.
not. They
Snake
totally do that.
protocol. The
Yep.
Simon Snake protocol.
They
Well, if
always say
anyone
that.
sees you shopping in the wild, now we'll know.
Yep. Well, that's
That's so
exactly how
fun.
it'll look.
Well, friend, thank you. I think this is it's just so good to sit and hear from someone who has walked the road a little bit ahead of you
Mm.
and to offer insight and how it's worked out in your own family and how it starts with your own walk with the Lord. I think traditionally we have ended the GraceLaced podcast with a couple of questions, and I think they feel appropriate for today too. So, as we think about families and parenting, what would you say is a gospel truth we need to remember? Why does it matter?
I think the gospel truth is that we get to put the love of Jesus, the mercy of Jesus, and the grace of
Mm,
God on display every single day in our parenting journey.
yeah.
And because the ultimate goal of the gospel is that we might be brought into his presence and be made more like him, then it's not a one-way street. As parents, we should not be surprised when we're sanctified in the process of sharing the gospel
Yeah.
with the very ones who will sanctify, who will be part of our sanctification in the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. That's a beautiful lens to remember as we look through and see what it looks like to parent. Okay. And then any ideas for one small thing? We talk about one small thing, not a huge life change. Like we're not going out
Yeah.
and selling everything we own, but like what's one small thing that a mama who's listening today could do or take to heart as she kind of moves on
Mhm.
after taking the AirPods out for this episode?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing. Still, I feel like this is a perennial one small thing, but I am remembering and choosing to look my child in the eye when
Mm,
he's asking a question and I'm answering. Obviously, there are times when you're saying, hold up, just a minute, I got to finish this.
yeah.
But I'm thinking about more and more how they will leave my home with a recollection of whether or not they remember my eyes when they talk to
Yeah.
me. Because if they remember, that every time they talked to me, I was looking at a device or I was looking somewhere else or I was multitasking. They won't remember what my eyes look like. So I want them to see my
Yeah.
eyeballs a little bit more.
Mm,
Eye to
I
eye.
love that one. Yeah. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you found it as helpful and encouraging as I did, would you take a minute to do two things? First, will you send it to a friend who needs some encouragement too when it comes to parenting? I'm serious. Right now, grab the episode link and text it to whoever comes to mind. Secondly, would you consider writing a quick review for the podcast? Doesn't matter what platform you're listening on, wherever you are, just write a quick review to help other people find us. We'd be so honored to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us today.